If persuasion feels harder than it should, you might be speaking the wrong language. Hi, I'm Mark Donnigan. In this Marketing Execution podcast episode, Tim and I unpack how mental habits shape decisions and why buyers shift based on context. This pattern shows up constantly when building B2B revenue engines and sales teams that win trust. Let's get into the discussion.
Listen up, it's marketing time. Bright ideas sparking, blowing your mind. From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Welcome to the Marketing Execution Podcast. This is the show for tech founders and leaders building B2B products and technologies. We show you how to go further, faster to get the business results you need.
From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Mark, I've been chewing on something all week that I think could change how a lot of founders approach their entire communication strategy. You ever have those moments where you're talking to someone and it just feels like you're speaking completely different languages?
Oh, all the time. And honestly, that's not just a feeling. There's real science behind why that happens.
Right? So I was digging into this framework around what are called mental habits, and it's based on neuro-linguistic programming. The core idea is that people literally program themselves with specific ways of processing information as they grow up. And if you can identify those patterns, you can actually predict how someone's going to respond to your pitch, your email, your sales call, whatever.
Yes, and here's what makes this really powerful for founders. This isn't some fixed personality test like Myers-Briggs where you slap a label on someone and call it a day. These mental habits are situational. The same person might think one way when they're evaluating a vendor and completely differently when they're hiring for their team.
So it's more fluid than we typically think about personality.
Exactly. And that's the hidden secret here. Most founders I talk to, they create one pitch deck, one sales script, one set of marketing copy, and they blast it out to everyone. But if you understand that your prospect's mental habits shift based on context, you can tailor your approach in real time.
Okay, so let's break this down. What are the key mental habits founders should actually pay attention to?
So there are 14 total, but let me give you the ones that I think matter most for go-to-market. First, you've got what I call the motivation spectrum. Some people are positively incentivized, meaning they're driven by what they can gain. Others are negatively incentivized, meaning they're motivated by what they want to avoid.
So like one person wants to hear about the opportunity and another person needs to hear about the threat.
Yes, you absolutely get it. I once heard of a company that was selling cybersecurity software, and they couldn't figure out why their conversion rates were so inconsistent. Turns out half their prospects were motivated by growth. Like, hey, this will make your infrastructure more robust. But the other half were motivated by fear. Like, if you don't do this, you're going to get breached. Same product, completely different messaging required.
That's wild. So how do you actually identify which type someone is?
So you listen to their language. Positively incentivized people talk about goals, what they want to achieve, what they are building toward. Negatively incentivized people talk about problems, risks, things they want to prevent. And you mirror that language back to them. If they're talking about threats, don't pitch them on opportunity. Meet them where they are.
That makes so much sense. What else should founders be paying attention to?
The second big one is the validation source. Are they self-validated or do they need external validation? Self-validated people trust their own judgment. They'll say things like, I think this went well, or I believe this is the right approach. People who need external validation defer to others. They'll say, my team thought it was good, or the board seemed happy with it. And that changes how you persuade them completely. With self-validated people, you cannot tell them what to do. They'll resist. You have to speak in suggestions. You might say, if you're looking to maximize your conversion rate, you may want to consider this approach. But with externally validated people, you can be more direct. You can cite authority, mention what other successful founders have done, reference industry standard.
I feel like I've made this mistake so many times, trying to tell a confident founder what to do and watching them completely shut down.
We all have. And here's the thing. On this podcast, the Marketing Execution Podcast, we talk a lot about tactics, but this is really about the meta skill underneath all the tactics. If you can't read your audience, the best playbook in the world won't save you.
Okay, so we've got motivation type and validation source. What's the third one?
The third is what I call scope orientation. Some people are whole-oriented. They think in big picture, abstract terms. Others are detail-oriented. They need the specifics, the concrete examples, the step-by-step breakdown.
And you can tell by how they describe things.
Exactly right. A whole-oriented person will say something like, "We decided to pivot our strategy." A detail-oriented person will tell you about the meeting, who was there, what was said, and every step of the decision process. And if you're pitching a whole-oriented person and you go deep into the weeds, you'll lose them. They'll get bored or overwhelmed. But if you stay too high level with a detail-oriented person, they won't trust you because you seem vague.
So the best communicators are actually code switching constantly.
That's the skill, and it's learnable. You just have to pay attention to the cues people are giving you in real time.
You know what's interesting? I read some research recently that said the most effective communication actually does both. It leads with a big idea, but supports it with memorable, concrete details. So maybe the goal isn't just matching their style, but finding that sweet spot.
I think that's right for broadcast communication, like a keynote or blog post. But in one-on-one conversations, in sales calls, in investor meetings, you've got to lean into their preference. You can always add the other layer if you sense they need it.
That's a really good distinction. All right, so we've covered motivation, validation, and scope. There's one more I want to dig into because I think it's underrated. Persuasion requirements. The idea that different people need different amounts of evidence before they'll change their mind.
Oh, this is huge. So some people have minimal requirements. You show them one piece of evidence and they're convinced. Others have what I call strict requirements. They basically never fully believe anything. You have to re-argue your point every single time.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But if you know someone has strict requirements, you stop expecting a breakthrough moment. You just commit to the long game. You show up consistently, you make your case again and again, and eventually you build enough credibility that they'll act even if they're not fully convinced.
So it's almost like you're not trying to change their mind. You're trying to build a pattern of trust. That's fascinating. Let's pivot for a second and talk about how you actually train a team to do this, because it's one thing for a founder to develop this skill, but scaling it across a sales org feels like a whole different challenge.
You know, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I think most founders get this completely backward.
How so?
Well, they try to create these rigid scripts. They build out these playbooks that say, when the prospect says X, you respond with Y. And look, I get why. It feels scalable. It feels controllable. But you can't script your way to reading someone's mental habits in real time.
Yeah, I've seen that field so many times. The rep sounds robotic, the prospect checks out, and everyone wonders why our conversion rates are tanking.
Exactly. So the real question becomes, how do you train people to listen differently? Because that's what this is really about. It's not about memorizing 14 mental habits and running through a checklist in your head while someone's talking.
Right, that would be exhausting and weird.
Super weird. So what I tell founders is start with awareness before you worry about the application. Get your team to notice their own mental habits first.
Oh, that's interesting. So like self-awareness as the foundation.
Yes, because here's what happens. Once a sales rep realizes, oh wait, I'm someone who needs external validation. I'm always looking for approval from my manager before I trust my own judgment. They start to see it in other people too. It's like learning a new language. You have to hear it in yourself before you can hear it in others.
And that's way less threatening than telling someone, hey, you need to change how you sell.
Way less threatening. You're not criticizing their technique, you're just expanding their vocabulary for understanding human behavior. And once that clicks, the practical stuff follows naturally.
Okay, so let's say I'm a founder and I've got a team of 8 sales reps. What does this actually look like in practice?
So I know of a company that did this really well. They started with what they called listening labs. Once a week, the team would review recorded sales calls together. But they weren't evaluating whether the rep closed a deal or said the right things. They were just trying to identify the prospect's mental habits from the language they use.
So it becomes almost like a game, like can you spot the pattern?
Exactly. And what happened was fascinating. The reps started competing with each other in a healthy way. Someone would say, I think this prospect is detail-oriented because they kept asking for specifics about implementation. And someone else would push back and say, no, I think they're actually self-validated because notice how they kept saying, I believe this and I think that.
And that debate itself is the training.
That's the whole point. You're building the muscle through repetition and discussion, not through some boring PowerPoint about personality type.
I love that. But what about the reps who just don't get it? Like some people are naturally more attuned to this stuff, and others are just not.
Yeah, that's real. And I'm not going to pretend everyone can become a master at this, but here's what I found. Even the reps who struggle with the nuance can learn to ask better questions. You don't have to be a mind reader. You just have to be genuinely curious. So instead of training them to identify mental habits on the fly, you train them to create space for the prospect to reveal those habits. Ask open-ended questions. Let the silence sit for a second. Don't rush to fill every gap with your pitch because the prospect will tell you everything you need to know if you just let them talk. People love talking about themselves. And the language they use, the examples they give, the way they frame their problems, it's all right there. You just have to pay attention.
You know what this reminds me of? There's this concept in coaching called active listening, where the goal isn't to respond, but to understand. And I think a lot of sales training misses that entirely.
Oh, completely. Most sales training is about what to say. This is about what to hear. And that shift, that's the whole ballgame.
Okay, so we've talked about training a team to listen better and identify patterns, but I want to get tactical here. Once someone spots a mental habit, what do they actually do with that information in the moment?
So this is where the mirroring comes in. And it sounds simple, but it's surprisingly hard to do well. The idea is once you identify how someone processes information, you reflect that back in your language. Let's say you're on a call and you realize the prospect is negatively incentivized. They keep talking about risks, what could go wrong, problems they're trying to avoid. A lot of reps would instinctively try to flip that. They'd say, but think about all the opportunity here. And the prospect just tunes out.
Because you're speaking a different language.
Exactly. Instead, you lean into their frame. You say, look, if you don't address this now, here's what's likely to happen. You're not being manipulative. You're just meeting them where they are.
And that builds trust because they feel understood.
That's the hidden power here. People don't buy because you have the best features or the lowest price. They buy because they feel like you get them. And mirroring their mental habits is the fastest way to create that feeling.
This is making me rethink a lot of conversations I've had over the years. Mark, this has been incredibly rich. I want to shift gears though, because I think our listeners are probably wondering, okay, I understand why this matters, but what do I actually do? Let's dig into some specific frameworks they can start using right away.
Okay, so first thing, before you walk into any sales call, any investor meeting, any conversation where you need to influence someone, I want you to do one simple exercise. Write down the outcome you want. Because here's what happens when you don't do this. You walk in, you start talking, and you end up mirroring your mental habits instead of theirs.
Oh, that's sneaky. You think you're being strategic, but you're really just defaulting to your own patterns.
Exactly. So step one is always clarity on what you want. Step two is listening for clues in the first 90 seconds.
90 seconds? That's specific?
Give or take. But here's why that window matters. Most people reveal their mental habits almost immediately. The way they greet you, the questions they ask first, whether they jump straight to details or stay high level.
Can you give me an example? Like, what would you actually listen for?
Sure. So let's say you're pitching a VP of marketing at a mid-sized SaaS company. They sit down and the first thing they say is, we've been burned by 3 vendors this year, and I need to make sure this doesn't blow up in my face.
That's negatively incentivized right there.
Bingo. They're telling you exactly how they process decisions. They're thinking about threats, not opportunities. So what do you do with that?
You lean into the risk angle.
Right. You don't say, imagine all the growth you can unlock. That's your mental habit talking. Instead, you say, look, if you don't fix this pipeline problem in the next 2 quarters, you're going to miss your targets. And that conversation with your CEO is going to be rough.
It sounds almost manipulative when you say it out loud.
I get that, but you're not making anything up. You're just translating your message into their language. It's the same information, different packaging.
Okay, so we've got clarity on outcome, listen for clues in the first 90 seconds, then mirror their language. What's step 3?
Step 3, you got to validate before you pivot.
What do you mean by that?
So after you've identified their mental habit and mirrored it back, you need to check that you got it right. You do this by summarizing what you heard and watching their reaction. You say something like, "So it sounds like your biggest concern is making sure this doesn't create more problems than it solves." And then you pause. If they nod or say yes, you're locked in. If they correct you, even better. Now you have the real picture.
I love that. It's like calibration in real time.
And here's where it gets good. Notion did this brilliantly in the early days. So when they were selling into enterprise accounts, they noticed that different buyers had completely different mental habits. The IT team was detail-oriented and negatively incentivized. They wanted to know about security protocols and what could go wrong. But the end users, the actual teams who would use Notion every day, were whole-oriented and positively incentivized. They wanted to hear about flexibility and creativity.
So Notion had to speak 2 different languages in the same deal.
2 different languages in the same meeting sometimes. And they trained their sales team to do exactly what we're talking about. Listen for clues, mirror the language, validate before you pivot.
That's a lot to hold in your head during a live conversation.
It is at first, but it becomes automatic. Think of it like learning to drive. At first, you're thinking about every little thing. Check the mirror, signal, brake. But after a while, your brain just does it.
So it's really about repetition.
Repetition and reflection. After every important conversation, take 2 minutes to write down what mental habits you noticed. Did you mirror them well? What would you do differently? That's how you build a muscle.
Okay, I want to get tactical on one more thing. What about when you're not sure? Like the signals are mixed or the person is hard to read?
Great question. When in doubt, ask better questions. Open-ended stuff that lets them reveal themselves. Instead of saying, "Does this solution work for you?" which is a yes or no trap, you say, "Walk me through how you'd see this fitting into your current workflow." Now they have to think out loud. And when people think out loud, they use the language of their mental habit.
So you're creating space for them to tell you how to sell to them.
That's exactly right. You're letting them show you the path.
Mark, this has been incredibly practical. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground today, from the theory of mental habits all the way to specific frameworks people can use tomorrow. Before we wrap up, can you pull it all together? What are the key things our listeners should walk away with from everything we've discussed?
All right, let me bring this all together. We started by talking about mental habits, the idea that people literally program themselves with specific ways of processing information. And the key insight is that these habits are situational, not fixed. The same person thinks differently depending on the context. We covered 4 big ones that matter for founders: the motivation spectrum, validation source, scope orientation, and persuasion requirement.
Mark, after all of that, what is the one thing you really hope people do not forget?
Stop trying to convince people. Understand them. The moment you shift from pushing your message to hearing their language, everything changes. That's when selling stops feeling like selling and starts feeling like helping. The Marketing Execution Podcast is produced by Growth Stage Marketing. We are on a mission to see your company reach wild success using marketing pods.
Too big, accept dreams. Catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Thank you for listening and being a part of the marketing execution movement and community. To learn how growth stage marketing clients reach more buyers and drive business impact, go to growthstage.marketing. That's growthstage.marketing.